Director here at the seminary, and I want to welcome you to our very first Speakers Forum at the Massena Mansion. And before I introduce our guest speaker for tonight, I want to give you a very brief history of this estate. Now, you may know that this was a former Livingston estate. And the Livingston family actually came here during colonial times from Scotland. And they became a very wealthy family. They had extensive land holdings all the way to Massachusetts. And they owned most of the land along the Hudson River here. And the founder, or the head of the family was named Robert Livingston. And he built the Claremont Mansion as a place where he and his family lived. And that's in Germantown, down the road here. And he was called the Lord of the Manor. And during those colonial times, they passed on the family lands to the next Robert Livingston, and then the third Robert Livingston. And they all were called the Lords of the Manor. And the last one was Judge Robert Livingston. And he lived during the latter part of the 1700s. And his brother was named Philip LIvingston, and he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And Robert Livingston's son, which was named Robert Livingston, also was on the Continental Congress, and he helped draft the Declaration of Independence, but he was called away before it was finished, so he couldn't sign it. But this shows what a very prominent family that the Livingstons were, not only in New York State, but also in the 13 colonies. But by 1775, Judge Livingston passed away, and his wife, Margaret Beekman Livingston, decided to divide up the land along the river to their 9 children. And so their third son, who's John Livingston, got this land right here, which is now we call Barrytown. And in 1796, he built a most magnificent mansion that was modeled after a chateau in France. And it was an exact replica of that mansion. And it was considered in those days one of the most beautiful homes in America. By 1860, after he passed away, a very rich merchant in New York City named John Aspinwall bought this property, and he used it for a summer home for his family. And he was related to the Roosevelt family, to the FDR branch. And that's why in 1868, young Theodore Roosevelt came here with his family, and they spent the month of August here. And on the day that he arrived, he decided to write a diary. And he started that diary the day he came here, and he kept it for the rest of his life. And this is one volume of his boyhood diaries, and it says right in the front page, by Theodore Roosevelt, my life, 3 weeks of my life, age 9 years, August 1868. And he came here also with his nanny, who was very fond of Dora Watkins. But she had to go back to New York City after a couple of days. And he wrote numerous letters to her while he was staying here. And he filled those letters with drawings, and he wrote about his great adventures that he was doing here. He went swimming in the Tivoli Bay. He took his pony every morning and rode 6 miles to Kruger Island. He said he was being chased sometimes in the woods by wild dogs. And one day he rowboated through the Tivoli Bay with his mother and his uncle and his dog Jack. And he went up the Sawkill Creek, and they had picnic lunch by the waterfalls. And during that time, he became very interested in nature. And you can imagine why, living in a beautiful environment like this. And before he became president, before he got interested in politics, he was thinking of becoming a naturalist. But while he was here, he collected little mammals and birds and snakes and spiders and bugs, and he called it the Theodore Roosevelt Museum of Natural History. And his father, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., who was very prominent in New York City, was helping to found the Museum of Natural History in New York City. So one of the first collections, when it opened up, was young Theodore's bugs and insects. mammals. And it's probably still there in some drawer collecting dust. Anyway, tragedy unfortunately struck this estate in 1885, and this beautiful mansion burned down to the ground. By this time, John Aspinwall had passed away. His widow, Jane Aspinwall, found a prominent architect in New York City named William Potter. He was famous already for building some very beautiful buildings in Princeton University. And she said to him before she went to Europe, "Build me a house that won't burn down." And then when she came back, she found this house finished. It's a beautiful mansion, but compared to that chateau that she had here, this heavy Gothic, dark brick, she didn't like it. And they say she was appalled, but she had to live in it the rest of her life. But you can see later from the photographs that we have in the back of the inside and the outside of the building that it was indeed a beautiful mansion. Well, anyway, by 1920s, a family named Kip bought the mansion, and in 1929 they sold it to John D. Rockefeller. Why did he want it? Apparently, one morning he woke up from his bedroom, looked out the window, and over the treetops he saw a building, and it was obstructing his view, and he didn't like it. So he wanted to find out what was that building, and it turned out to be the Christian Brothers School. So right away he went over there, or maybe he sent someone over there, and he made a deal with them to build them a bigger and better school on a beautiful riverfront property, and they would swap lands. So he built this enormous building, and in 1 year, by 1930, the Christian Brothers moved in and started their school. And then he took the other property and he destroyed the building, so we didn't have to look at it anymore. So the Christian Brothers they had their school here, and they had a working farm, and they prospered, and they did very well for many years. And many neighbors who are older here remember coming here for Christmas parties, and they said it was a fabulous atmosphere and a wonderful time, and they would ice skate with the brothers on the pond, and they had a really great time here. But the Christian Brothers, their enrollment in the school started to decline, and finally they had to close it. So eventually, in 1974, Reverend Sun Young Moon and the Unification Church bought the property and established the Unification Theological Seminary. And that's been here all these years, up until a couple of years ago. And it moved to New York City. So the hope is that we understand that in a couple of years, we're going to establish a 4-year undergraduate college here. So that's a brief history.